Hey everybody, this is Tyler. I just wanted to do a quick video, kind of a recap. We had great feedback from the podcast that we put out about wind and making corrections and a systematic wind approach. And, we want to clarify some things. There were some apparently questions that weren't answered, and, that was something that we wanted to take care of for all of y'all. So the first thing I'm going to do when we get started here is I'm going to be in my ballistic calculator. Now, we all use GeoBallistics, ballistic arc program. It's a phenomenal ballistic calculator for your phone. You can Bluetooth weather meters to it, the whole setup. The app, the weather meter, sub $100. I mean, you can't beat it. So we like this program. It's always been accurate for us, things like that. So if you look at the screen here, bam, you should have what I see right here on the iPad, which is my drop chart for my 6.5 Creedmoor that I put together. It's fake. I don't have this real rifle, but using 140 grain ELD bullets, traveling at like 2750, 2775, something like that. What we really want to look at is the wind column. All right. Right now, I have my shot bearing set to 0, and my wind is zeroed out up until 600 yards, and then it starts to have some correction that's needed for spin drift. Right now, I'm going to go into my weather. This was the number one question everybody asked, was how do you set your rifle's mile per hour? So this is it right here, using a ballistic calculator, some type of ballistic engine. We are going to play with the wind speed, okay, to set a pattern. That's what we need. So I'm going to go with 7 miles an hour at 270 degrees, coming directly from my left, full value wind, 270. I'm going to hit done, and then I'm going to look at that wind column on my drop chart. Go down to 600 yards, it says 0.6, 500, 0.5, 400, 0.4, 300, 0.2. We've got a pretty good pattern right there. The distance is equal to the wind correction. So 7 miles per hour will be my rifle's wind speed. Done. With the systematic wind corrections, we go into what elements do we need to make a wind correction. Well, we have 4 of them, right? Direction, distance, value, and velocity. And not in that order. Those are just the 4 elements that we need to make an accurate prediction of what the wind is going to do to our projectile while it is traveling from point A to point B, right? Now, the wind direction is very simple. Left to right or right to left. Why do you think we have to say it that way? If we're working with somebody, if we have a partner, if we have a friend, if we're talking to anybody that's trying to do a wind correction, by telling them you have a left to right or a right to left wind, you've told them where it's coming from, where it's going, and the first direction that you gave them is the direction they will dial or hold. So I have a left to right wind. I'm going to be holding left. I will dial left. When you're dialing, it's important that you think about how your dials work. Now, this is for counterclockwise turrets, okay? Most of your American scopes are all counterclockwise. Now, dialing left, I'm going to push left. My thumb will go away from me. Left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now my thumb is going away from me as I dial left. Now if I need to dial right, it will be pull right. My thumb will be coming toward me. Right, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. There it is. All right, without having to look at the scope to make a wind correction, if I can remember to push left or pull right, it should save me from having to break my position, right? Now, we get into wind values. A wind value is simply if the wind is blowing 90 degrees perpendicular to my position, this way or that way, and I'm shooting this direction, I get the full effect of the wind all the way to the target. Now, if the wind is coming from an angle, right, then I'm only getting a partial effect. I'm getting a percentage of the full value effect. So when we talk about value, we're talking about chopping up that full value wind call so that we can accurately predict the percentage and how it will affect our bullet in flight. All right, so I like to use the clock method. Right, now this can be used in any direction, but let's say that we're talking about this area right here, as you can see on the slideshow. Okay, full value here. Now, a 9/10 value puts you at roughly a 2:30 position. A 3/4 value is about 1:30 to 2 o'clock. So think about that here. Here's noon, here's 1, here's 2. So right in this area, which puts you at maybe a 45-degree angle, you're dealing with a 3/4% wind value, right? 75%, 3/4 value. Half is more of like a 1 o'clock right here, all right? And then 12:30, not quite, no value straight in front of you, but slightly off to the left or to the right, or even behind you, right? You're dealing with a very small percentage of wind effect. So you use these values to change your wind formula. Change your wind outcome. And we'll get more into how the formula works, right? But first, we need to be able to look downrange. Using our Kestrel, using our weather meter, all of these things can help us only at our position. It cannot tell us what's happening downrange. Now, I know they got a cool little scope coming out from Trijicon and whoever else, like, hey, the wind will do this for you. And that's great, but we should never forget the basics of how to make a wind call using our eyeballs to observe what's happening. What is the vegetation doing? What is the grass doing? How much wind does it take to move this grass or that sagebrush or these trees, right? So you look at these environmental speed indicators such as tree leaves in constant motion. That's a pretty common one, 5 to 8 miles an hour. You can instantly know by just the tree leaves blowing that you have a 5 to 8 mile per hour wind. Right, small tree swaying, large tree swaying. So all of these factors, right? And these are pretty consistent, but then you want to make some small adjustments depending on your environment and what the normal is, right? Now moving on, we have Mirage. Mirage is heat waves coming off the ground, coming off an object, right? Either way, you are seeing heat rise up. And the biggest thing that Mirage will do for you is give you a direction, right? It will confirm or change. And I say change because I've been to ranges where you feel wind one direction, Mirage is doing something different. All right, so you can look downrange at different distances by adjusting your parallax and looking at that distance. What is the Mirage doing? If I'm shooting 1,000 yards, I'll probably check 3, 6, or 700, and then 1,000. See what the Mirage is doing at each distance. Make sure I'm seeing all of those directions, left, right, if there's change, if there's not change. So very important. Now I can also use Mirage to give me a velocity, but it's a little bit more complicated than just seeing a cool little picture with waves, right? It's not always that easy to see those waves and what angle they're bent over at. And the higher they get off the ground or higher they get off that object, the more bent over they're going to be. So you have to take that and really train and practice to pick up that Mirage wave angle, right? But you definitely can get a direction from it. Now you cannot get value. You cannot tell if the waves are blowing, at a 45-degree angle to your position. So value's out of the question, right? Direction, velocity of the wind, those are the two factors. Now how to pick up Mirage. It's not always easy, but looking at objects that have some type of horizontal or linear edge to it will help you distinguish what those waves are doing, right? You'll see it coming off, you'll see it moving this way, a car hood, target, the top edge of a square target, target frame, that's holding a target. All of these things can help you see Mirage. If you're using that horizontal bar, it's going to give you a little bit better chance of seeing what's actually happening. So here's the systematic wind formula, right? This is going to go back to the beginning where we were using the ballistic calculator to establish our rifle's baseline, right? So we have to establish a baseline, which we did in the beginning. And then we have this method allowing quick, no-tech solution, meaning I don't need this iPad, I don't need my phone, because in my brain I am capable of making this wind call without any of those gadgets, right? And that's what I want, because my brain is going to process what's happening downrange, and these cool little gadgets are not. They're going to process what's happening at your position. Don't get me wrong, I like Kestrels and I like all those cool little toys, right? But they're just one-sided answers. They're not giving you the full picture, so they can't give you the full result either, right? Now each distance will have a consistent start value. That's the whole purpose of setting up our rifle's baseline mile per hour. If I have a 7 mile per hour gun, then it should have established a pattern for me that every 100 yards is going to be equal to a 10th mil wind correction of that same value. So 100 is 0.1. 200 yards is a 0.2 wind correction. 300 yards is a 0.3 wind correction, right? So that's just my starting point. It doesn't mean anything other than it gives me a place to start, which seems to be the most difficult thing shooters have. Well, where do I start with my wind call? So now you got a starting point. Okay, now that we have our wind velocity baseline, or at least we know what it is and why we're doing it, okay, you look at the ballistic calculator. And like I did in the beginning of this video, what I did was set up my shot bearing. If you look at my chart here, stop it. Okay, if you look at my ballistic drop chart on the right hand side of this screen, my shot bearing is registering 0. I told the calculator I am shooting 0 degrees north. And then when I go into the weather feature, I told the calculator the wind is moving from 270 degrees, meaning the wind is coming from my left. Now why did I choose my left? I'll tell you why. Because I'm shooting a right-handed twist barrel. So at a certain distance, my projectile will be spinning in a right-handed motion and it will start to drift into that direction, right? So if my bullet is drifting to the right, I don't want to tell the calculator that the wind is coming from the right, because it will assume that the spin drift is helping it, right? Which it is. So I want to know the true miles per hour, which means I need to come from left to right, or basically the opposite direction of the twist of my barrel. If you're running a left-handed twist, then you would want to use 90 degrees, right? So you can find that true number. Now, on the screen here, you should be able to see that I'm using 600 yards as my reference point. I am going to adjust my wind speed, whether it be 5 miles an hour, 4, 7, 8, 10 miles an hour, whatever that wind speed is, so that 600 yards is going to equal a 0.6 mil wind correction. Once I've established that miles per hour, that is my rifle's baseline mile per hour, and it should have established a pattern throughout the rest of my dope card until about 700 or 800 yards, right? But inside 800 yards, it should be consistent with the distance. 100 yards, 0.1 mil wind correction, or whatever that wind speed was, right? But now you have your rifle's baseline. If you're using minutes of angle, the process is exactly the same, but we are using 500 yards as our reference. And what we're looking for is a wind speed that will establish a pattern of half of the distance is our correction in minutes of angle. So if I have 500 yards, we take the first number, 5. Cut it in half. What do you got? You got 2.5. That is the MOA value I'm looking for to create that pattern. If I have that pattern, then 300, half of that would be 1.5. That would be my starting point for 300 yards, 1.5 minutes, right? So I'm developing the same pattern. Now you're going to notice that the miles per hour required to establish this pattern is going to be a little bit more than on the mil side of the house, which is fine. It's just your rifle's number. It doesn't mean anything other than that's your starting point, right? So once you get your calculator set up for minutes of angle, 500 yards should equal 2.5 MOA wind correction. And that built your pattern all the way out to 700, 800 yards. Half of 7, 3.5. That should be what's on your calculator, right? Now you know what your baseline mile per hour is for your rifle. And then we got the 3-step wind process. I'm reading 3 here and it's messing me up. Step 1, what's your starting point? Step 2, what is my multiplier? And then step 3, all right, adding in the value. I need to add in the value at the very end. So basically, if I were to take away step 3, step 1 and 2 would get me a full value wind call. And then step 3 would change that wind correction based off of what type of wind value I'm seeing and how that will affect my projectile in flight. But if you went through that systematic approach of my range is equal to my wind call for mils, or my range is half of my wind call in minutes, then you already have your starting point. If you know the target distance, then you already know your starting point. Step one is simple. I have a target at 400 yards. What's my start point? 0.4 mils. It's that easy, right? Because you know that you have that systematic breakdown of this wind formula. Okay, so like I said, baseline wind correction, what is my starting point? If I'm using mils, it's equal to the range. If I'm using minutes, it is half of that range, right? And I did this by playing with the wind speed at a 270 degree angle, or sorry, direction to my position to establish that pattern. That is what we're looking for, people, all right? Step two, adjust for wind velocity. So how do I get my multiplier? Well, it's called a multiplier for a reason, because we'll be using it to multiply your starting point. So now the question is, how do we get it? Well, that's very, very simple, right? And your brain might work in completely different ways than mine, right? I've told people, hey, take the actual wind that you see out there, out at the range, and divide it by your rifle's miles per hour. And mine's blown, right? It's like, oh shit, man, I ain't done multiplication since elementary school. But at the same time, you could take that same person and ask them, well, how many times does your rifle's baseline go into what you're seeing? And they're like, oh, it goes into 2. It's like, okay, you just did the division, right? So however your brain works, it's all good, all right? As long as we're achieving the end result, it's all that matters, all right? So if my rifle, I'm using mil scope, is a 7 mile per hour baseline. If I have a 15 mile per hour wind, I want to keep it simple. I'm not trying to use decimals. I want to keep it simple up to whole numbers or half numbers. So I have a 15 mile per hour wind I am observing out at the range. I have a 7 mile per hour rifle. 7 goes into 15 2 times. I now have my multiplier, which is 2. If I'm using minutes, let's say that my mile per hour baseline on the screen here is 11. I see a 15 mile per hour wind downrange. 11 into 15. 1.5, right? We want to stick to halves. We work in halves. So 1.5. Now I have my multiplier for minute of angle, right? So I take my starting point, multiply it by my multiplier, and then it's on to step 3, okay? Step 3 is that value correction. We can't go without it. It's very important that we do step 3, right? We don't always have full value winds. So step 3 is, well, I did my formula up to this point, but now I need to adjust. Well, I see a 3/4 wind out there. So I need to take 25% away from whatever my wind correction was, right? That is how it works. So we're going to go through this, test what you know. And here's what we know. The target is at 580 yards. So our starting point would be, we round up. 0.6, right, or 600 yards. 0.6 for mils, 3 MOA for minutes. The wind is blowing right to left, so I know that I'll be holding right, or I'll be dialing right, pull right, okay? At roughly the 2 o'clock, I'm going to call that a 3/4 value. So, 3/4 value is 1:30, 2 o'clock-ish. I'm happy with that. So I know my value. Now I see dust blowing and small trees swaying in the wind. Well, dust blowing is 8 to 12, but small trees swaying would be 12 to 17. So really, the dust blowing is just on the screen to confuse you. All right, it doesn't serve a big purpose other than to confirm what you already know, which is trees are swaying, so it should be 12 to 15 miles per hour, right? Or sorry, 12 to 17. So what I will do is, what's my starting point? 0.6 or 3 MOA. At roughly the 2 o'clock, so it's a 3/4 value, right? So step 1, 0.6. Now I need my multiplier. If I'm using my 7 mile per hour baseline for mils, well, I'm guessing that it's a 15 mile per hour wind. All right, tree swaying is 12 to 17. We'll just go right in the middle. So 7 into 15 is 2. So I got a multiplier of 2. 0.6 times 2 is 1.2 mils. but I got a 3/4 value, so I got to take away 25% of that, right? Now, I'm not the smartest guy out there. I can tell you right now that decimals have a way of messing with all of us. So what I'll do is I'll just remove that decimal from my brain for a second. 1.2 is now 12. What is 1.2 divided by 4? Well, that would be 3. Well, now I'm going to take 3 away from 12. What do I have? I have 9. Put my decimal back into that spot. 0.9 mils is my wind correction. Okay, it's not rocket science. You keep it simple. Whatever will help you process this information faster. On the minute side of the house, I started with 3 MOA, right? Half of 6, 3 MOA. 11 goes into 15, 1.5 times. That's my multiplier. So 3 times 1.5 gives me 4.5 minutes of angle. Now I need to adjust for that 3/4 wind value. Step 3, adjust for value of the wind. So I need to take 25% off, 4.5. The easy method would just be to think about, well, what's 1/4 of 5? 1/4 of 5 would be 1.25, right? 1.5, somewhere in that range. So I'll just take 1.25 off of my 4.5, and it'll leave me with 3.25. Now a lot of us can't even shoot 1/4 MOA. So if we're making a wind call of 3.5 or wind call of 3 minutes and we're off by 1/4 MOA, I mean, there's so many other factors that would cause your wind correction to be off, besides the fact that you rounded in a different direction. Maybe you judge the wind wrong, maybe you're not a 1/4 MOA shooter, maybe your ammo doesn't even shoot half MOA, right? So we got all these factors. The important thing is that we're able to make these wind corrections in our head and get our shots off with accurate wind corrections in the same wind that we started doing this formula. You don't want to make a wind call for a 15-mile-an-hour wind and then it dies. And you're holding for a 15-mile-an-hour wind, but now it's a 5, right? So you want this process to be fast, and it's going to take some time to build these habits, especially the starting point, right? That's a habit that you just need to build. You step up, you know the distance to your target. Point whatever for whatever distance you're shooting. Target's at 600, 0.6 starting point, right? So very simple formula. All right, if you guys have any questions, feel free to hit me up. You can find us on Instagram at Max Ordinate, Facebook Max Ordinate Academy. You can also find our email addresses on the website. You can message us or call us via our website, maxordinate.com. Any questions you have, any other videos or tips or suggestions that you have for us to put out, we're happy to do it. We're here for you to make some cool educational videos.